Talk to me about change leadership in the sense that, like, change happens on its own, right? In some ways, you don't really get a choice. And then there's deliberate change, right? And deliberate change has to have a driver. And you all strike me as drivers of deliberate change in your organizations, right? Talk to me about being a change leader.
I would submit that change in my environment happens because of when citizens, residents are engaged together, change is an outcome. In this particular instance that I'm going to talk about, it came from the reality that there will be 2.3 billion more people on the planet in the next 40 years, and all of them will be over the age 65. Okay, 2.3 billion more people on the planet in the next 40 years, and all of them over the age 65. That's a demographic reality. It's not conjecture. So what happens in this, by the way, this state demographically is the oldest state in the country, and it's not close. However, what makes this a big deal is the fact that the rest of the globe is aging at an unprecedented rate. So the leadership phenomenon, Nathan, that you're talking about is, so how do we turn that into something that matters to this community? How do we turn it into something that might matter to the economy in this area as well as in this state? Intel thinks this is such a big deal that they're spending more money on the technology of aging in place than anybody in the country. It's anticipated that by the year 2020, $20 billion will be spent on just that slice of dealing with the technology of aging in place. Verizon Health and Sprint and AT&T combined are going to spend $15 billion by the year 2020 on mobile health applications for issues that relate to keeping people well as they age. Now, so the leadership is, how is it that you turn what typically is a hand-wringing reality of demographics, which is who Florida is. And by the way, just so that you know, Sarasota is the oldest large county in the country. Okay? 31% of all the people who live in Sarasota are over the age 65.
Fine wine.
Exactly. Okay? This state's 18%. The nation's 13%. The oldest country in the world is 22%. However, for the first time in the history of the globe, there are more old people than young people, and that will never change. It's a simple math equation of longevity, significantly increased longevity, and substantially decreased birth rates in every country in the world. China right now is starting to figure out how they're going to engage African workers, African labor force, because they don't have enough labor in China. Okay, so this is that thing that we have an asset in this community, this state, and how is it that we employ that in such a way so that we become the place where the greatest innovations around the product, services, and policies about a global issue are happening here. I would submit that at least in Sarasota and in the Tampa Bay region, that's happened because the community has turned it on its head and said, you know what, we recognize this as an economic opportunity.
If I can cut you off, Tom, maybe you want to pick up. Has Claro done anything like that? Is that in the game plan for Claro?
If I think back, it's really since 1995, every job that I've had has been about leading change. And it was the fundamental goal of the positions that I've had. And along the way, I've been very fortunate because they have been positions where I've been able to try different models. And when I think about leading change, I think about it in two ways. One is an inspirational leading of change, and there's change that's led by a good, strong value proposition. I found inspirational change. It's great. People feel good. You get to show them a higher purpose. They have an interest in making the change. The problem with that is what I found is when circumstances start to turn south, people revert back to natural behavior, and all of a sudden the change momentum starts to reverse. And it's hard to recover from that, because when people are sliding back like that, they pull everyone else with them. So I quickly figured out that if you're going to lead change and change is going to take hold, you have to understand who are the key stakeholders, who have the most to gain and the most to lose. And with every one of them, you have to build the value proposition. If you go along with me on this change, this is how it's going to turn out to be a good thing for you. And by the way, it's also good for these people over here. And it's when you can look at what you're trying to accomplish, you can find out what that value proposition is for the key people who are going to make the change happen. You can sell it to them and you can deliver on it. That's how I found I can create sustainable change. It's worked in the corporate environment in big companies. It's worked now in my company, which is small and highly entrepreneurial. It's worked in organizations and boards that I've been able to serve on. And so that's been an education for me, but that's really how I drive change.
Not the B word, please. Stacy, maybe you can pick it up from there. When I think about what Tom's describing, and you certainly see the community-facing side of change leadership. Tell us about it.
I actually come at this challenge in a little different way, and that is two parts. One, I know as a leader that I need to model the change. Like you said, you need to bring others along, but you need to model that every day going forward. But secondly, to understand the need for change in our communities, I have to look to the youth. And everyone in my organization needs to look to the youth. It's not to deny the experience and wisdom of elders who have experienced discrimination, stereotype, etc., and have firsthand hard knowledge about this. But youth today experience these issues very differently. And if I start a conversation here, the young people will not even know what we're talking about. So when they come to our programs, for example, one of the primary things that they might say is, if there's a checkbox about your race or ethnicity, unless there's one that says multi, I don't have a place to check. There can be another youth who says, because I'm an immigrant, I can't participate and I can't talk and I can't dialogue because I might be undocumented or you don't understand my documentation, so I'm at risk. So I can't participate actively in the community, in the program, even in my school. I can show up, but I can't engage. If you're gay, in some schools, this is, a dichotomy. There can be a GSA, a gay-straight alliance at a school that's very supportive and works to create a welcoming community, and there can be schools where this is absolutely still not talked about today. That's not a climate that allows a young person to engage. So when students identify those kinds of issues for our agency, that's where we know that those are their pain points. And I loved your example. Those are the points that we need to work hard to address with them to build their capacity to lead and others to lead with them and follow.
So Tom mentioned, or he sort of described a stakeholder analysis in the sense where you're trying to align the interests of parties, right? Especially the ones who have the most influence. And I hear management geeks talk about it in terms of goal congruence, or business folks like to say win-wins, right? Is that part of your strategy with your organization? Are you actively looking for win-win opportunities in the community?
I am, and it's so interesting because sometimes you can engage someone who understands the particular type of oppression that they have experienced, and sometimes they can make the link to, oh, I understand. So even though my experience was about ethnicity, I can understand how it might feel like that if your experience is around religion. And so they can then support an initiative, even though that isn't particularly their issue. And conversely, it can be stunning how a person who has experienced oppression because of their religion, for example, may not be able to make that leap at all and may look at someone who is similarly oppressed for a completely different reason and not be able to make that connection at all. So it really depends on the circumstance, or perhaps it depends on how we're able to frame it.
Excellent. I think at this point, it probably makes sense for us to stop working off my list and find out if there are any questions so far. I mean, we've got some really interesting folks up here who are doing really interesting things in the community, both on the aging side, the youth side, the bioscience side, and then we've got a technology play here who's asking for fundraising today. So what do you think so far? What is anything jumping out at you? Anybody have any questions or comments in the interest of fostering a dialogue that disrespects or disregards this little boundary we have here?
I'd like to hear Sean's perspective on that last question.
You know, I escaped without having to reword his question. What was the question? How do you lead change?
Well, we picked up with religion and your startup. Why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, because there's such an easy tie between. I mean, I feel. I mean, we're talking about medical. We're talking about human rights. We're talking about very global subjects. And for my company, we're addressing needs of consumers in a cutting-edge technology. How do you lead change in an environment that's changing anyway, whether we like it or not? Again, it gets back to what are consumers trying to get to, and how do we really start to look at how people are changing their behaviors? And for me, leading change is every day taking a look at my own beliefs and my own assumptions and saying, are those really matching up with where people are going? Stop me if I'm off track with answering your question.
This is about them, not me.
Well, they asked. Right. So, am I answering your question?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, because there are so many things that are going on today. There's a bandwidth problem, right? So we've got so many people that want to get involved in all these activities, and I love to get involved in our own community as well. Startup Weekend is coming. There's other things in the local community. The organizer of Barcamp Tampa Bay, along with a host of other people that are in there. There's no shortage of things to get involved with, but I've got to manage my own bandwidth and make sure that the things that I really want to make sure are happen, and therefore I have to kind of edit how many things I get involved with. The things that I find most worthwhile and most addressing change for areas that I really want to solve, which is how many people here pay for cable, $120 a month, and you're getting tired of it, right? My company starts to address that change. How do I stay focused on it? Yeah, right? So those are the kind of things.
So that's another form of, you see, in yours it's a demographic shift. For you, these are sort of social trends that, provide an impetus for your organization to exist.